The Cell Juniors are the prodigy of the late and great Perfect Cell. These 7 little bundles of joy were created to cause as much pain and suffering to the Z Fighters in order to get a reaction out of Gohan. And don't let their looks fool you, these guys were strong in their own right, taking on the likes of Super Saiyan Trunks and Vegeta and easily keeping up. If you want to know how strong these little guys are, I actually made a video about it right here. Even with their absurd strength, their lives lasted all but 10 to 15 minutes because, well, yeah, yikes. Anyways, in this video, I wanted to see what would have happened if one of these Cell Juniors actually survived this. Feel free to comment what you guys think would have happened in this scenario, and what name do you think a Cell Junior would pick for himself. Right now, I'm going for 6. But depending on your guys' ideas, I might change it. Now with that, let's hop right into the what if. Gohan laid on his back exhausted after an intense battle with the perfect android. The rest of the Z Fighters gathered around and celebrated his victory. And not long after, they all departed. Everyone except for Vegeta, who is still pondering over the death of his rival. As he swears that he'd never fight again, he suddenly senses a very faint ki lingering on the battlefield. "Show yourself," Vegeta yells out, aiming where he senses the ki. A butterfly appears from behind a rock, and Vegeta puts his hand down, believing that he's still on edge after everything that had just happened, and he'd too take his leave, still reflecting on Goku's death. The battlefield fell silent as the sun began to set, and behind the rock that Vegeta had aimed at laid an unconscious Cell Jr. His body was torn apart, still not recovered after the fatal blow that Gohan had landed on him. He'd slowly come to, and his body would begin to regenerate. Once it did, the young android rushes to his feet and frantically looks around for his father and brothers. But to his disappointment, he's met by a barren wasteland that reeked of blood and death. Tears slowly trickle down his face once he realizes that he's the last one left. Those feelings of grief quickly turned into anger as Six cried out in anguish. Revenge instantly flooded his mind, and he began to comb through his memories, trying to remember who killed his family. Flashes of a young warrior engulfed in a golden aura began to flicker in and out of his mind. It was son Gohan. Without a second thought, Six locked on to Gohan's ki, but as soon as he did, he'd quickly remember how easily the young Saiyan disposed of him and his brothers. He'd realized that he was far too weak, and with no way to avenge his family at the moment, Six decided that he would in fact have his revenge, but not now. No, now was the time for him to grow stronger. And so, for the next year, the young android spent every waking moment training himself to his limits in hopes of acquiring the strength necessary to defeat the boy who took everything from him. However, as ambitious as he was, over this year, Six would begin to notice something strange. It seemed as if no matter how hard he pushed himself, he was barely getting any stronger. This frustrated the young android to no end, but he continued to push himself forward, unaware of what was holding him back. Over the next few weeks, the young android trained himself even harder. Day in and day out, he trained himself half to death. But it was no good. As he laid on the ground exhausted, his anger began to fester as he became more and more frustrated with himself. In a rage, Six unleashed his ki, trying to see the fruits of his labor, trying to see the results of all the work he had put in. But to his disappointment, he had barely grown. At this rate, he would never be strong enough to defeat Gohan. And as this reality set in, Six fell to his knees and slammed his fist against the ground. What do we have here? It seems as if Kakarot's brat missed one. Vegeta says. To Six's horror, his eyes meets with the Prince of all Saiyans. He had been discovered. Vegeta lands and takes a few steps towards the android. To think that I'd find one of you cretins running around. I didn't know what to expect when I sensed your ki, but you're certainly the last thing I thought I'd come across, Vegeta says. Six continued to stare at the prince, and he'd realized that he had no choice but to fight. He'd immediately closed the distance between himself and Vegeta, trying to eliminate him quickly in order to keep his existence hidden until he was ready to take on Gohan. The young android lands a powerful punch on the prince's forehead, but he doesn't budge. Don't tell me that this is all you can muster. What a shame, Vegeta says. He then gives the young android a crooked smile, and his eyes begin to turn a bluish green color and a powerful golden aura explodes from his body. Six watches in fear as Vegeta ascended into his Super Saiyan form. Now, I'm going to enjoy this, Vegeta says, and with that he rushes the android and begins to throw him around with little effort. Six tries his best to keep up, but every one of his attacks are blocked and met with an even stronger counterattack. The longer that this continues, the more that Six begins to realize that Vegeta was just toying around with him, and it was only a matter of time until he decided to finish him off. As a result, Six began to look for an escape rather than trying to win the fight. Once Vegeta backed the android into a corner, he began to charge up a Big Bang attack. Six uses this opportunity to close in and unleashes a solar flare. He'd immediately begin to flee, but to his horror, Vegeta grabbed onto his leg and slammed him into the island below. "Did you honestly think that was going to work?" Vegeta says as his vision slowly returns. He'd continue to charge up his Big Bang attack, but he'd hesitate for a second when Gohan, Piccolo, Tien, and Yamcha all arrive on the battlefield, and that hesitation was all Six needed. Without a second thought, Six exploded upward with extreme force and blasted past all the Z-Fighters. His goal, space. He knew that once he got there, none of the Z-Fighters could catch him. "Oh no you don't," Vegeta yells out. "Big Bang attack!" The Sphere of Ki closed in on the android and collided into him with tremendous force, causing everything in the vicinity to shake. The Z-Fighters watched in anticipation, and when the smoke cleared, Six was surrounded by a green barrier. He looked down at the Z-Fighters and his eyes met with Gohan's. His blood began to boil, but now wasn't the time for revenge. And with that, Six exploded into space. Everyone watched in awe at what they had just witnessed. One of the Cell Juniors was still alive. Once in space, Six let his anger explode. All of his training was for nothing. All that time spent pushing his body to his limit, hitting the same wall over and over again, only to be outdone by an opponent who was once lesser than him. In a rage, the young android destroyed 2 planets, and for a second he aimed his hand at Earth in order to exact his revenge. However, the Saiyan cells flowing through his veins wouldn't allow him. Deep down he knew what he wanted, and that this wasn't it. He wanted to crush and humiliate Gohan at his best, and so he calmed down. And after some time of floating in space, he'd eventually head back to Earth. And as he does, he keeps his power level extremely low in order to avoid detection, and he'd land on a new abandoned island where he would continue his training. Over the next couple of months, Six could never find a solution to his stagnant power, and one day after a long training session, Six laid on the ground exhausted and frustrated, but as he sat in his quiet anger, he's greeted by a fuzzy little friend. It was a caterpillar. Six would hesitate with interacting with it at first, and the thought of ignoring it and even crushing the poor insect goes through the young android's mind. But due to Six having spent the last year and a half all alone, he instead decides to observe and interact with it. To his surprise, he found the bug extremely interesting, and so this continued on for the next couple of weeks. After long training sessions, Six would end his day by observing and interacting with the caterpillar, which he promptly named Fuzzy. Day after day, he'd watch as Fuzzy began to change, growing in size after every meal, until one day the caterpillar turned into a butterfly. Through this process, Six has an idea. He thinks to himself that maybe he too could grow and change like that. I mean, after all, his father in a sense did the same thing. He looks at his retracted tail and he thinks to himself that maybe he could acquire enough biomass to rapidly progress his body's growth, and hopefully that can help him break past the limits his current body has put on him. And so for the next 4.5 years, Six will go around gathering biomass by absorbing humans, and just like his father before him, he would swiftly avoid the androids, relocating as much as possible in order to stay hidden. And in the process, he would continue to train himself as much as possible. Gohan and Piccolo were relentless in their pursuit of the android, but no matter how much they tried, they could never catch him. City after city, the bodies continued to pile up, and there was nothing that they could do about it. Because of this, Gohan could not rest until Six was caught, and this caused the young warrior to take his training extremely seriously, in hopes of catching and defeating this monster. Throughout this process, Six's body would begin to slowly change until he had fully developed, and by the end of the 4.5 years, Six emerged far stronger than he could have ever imagined. After a long night of training, Six collapses to the ground out of exhaustion, and he takes a few seconds to catch his breath, and once he does, he'd raise his fist into the night sky and say, "It's time." Age 773. A full year before the events of the Buu Saga, havoc breaks out in Satan City. People run in fear for their lives from a creature resembling Cell as he caused mayhem and destruction. Six hovered above the city and rained down shots on the population, killing thousands. People trampled over one another trying to escape the city, while others cried out for their savior. cried out for the man who defeated Cell 6 years ago. And just when all hope seemed lost, the ki blast stopped. In the sky, 6 could be seen staring in one direction. "He's here," 6 says with a villainous smile. Seconds after he says this, Gohan tore through the sky with such force that the ground shook and trembled as he rocketed towards 6. With anger in his heart, Gohan transformed into a Super Saiyan, and using all the momentum he had gathered, puts it all into one powerful punch, throwing it at 6 with blinding speeds. It connects with the android's face with such force that the city below them begins to crumble. To Gohan's surprise though, 6 barely budged. 6 turns his head back towards the Saiyan and smirks. "You don't know how long I've waited to do this," 6 says. "Do what?" Gohan asks, and as soon as the Saiyan asks this, he's caught off guard by 6 landing a powerful punch that sends Gohan crashing into the city below. 6 chases after him and immediately begins to attack Gohan, crashing through buildings and causing hundreds of casualties, all whilst throwing the Saiyan around. For a time, 6 was ecstatic about his dominance over the Saiyan, but the longer that this continued, the more 6 began to realize that this was far too easy and was not how he wanted this fight to go. Once Gohan was backed into a corner and could seemingly no longer fight back, 6 began to question the young Saiyan, grabbing him by his gi. "Where is he? Where is the warrior that took everything from me? Bring him out so I can crush him." Gohan would be confused by the first part of his sentence, but he decides to ignore it for now. Breathing heavily, Gohan lets the android know that he can't go all out, not here in the city. 6 drops the Saiyan and looks around at the destroyed city and watches as civilians scramble for cover. Is that so? Well, if this scenery isn't to your liking, I have a better place in mind. And where is it? Before Gohan could finish his sentence, 6 grabs him by his face and his ki explodes with tremendous force as he takes off, dragging Gohan along with him. Gohan tries to undo his grip, but he can't in his current condition. Once they arrive, 6 violently slams Gohan into a white tournament stage, and once Gohan got to his feet, he would look around in awe. They had arrived at a rebuilt Cell Games arena. Quite fitting, isn't it? The man who killed my family will share the same grave as them. I find it quite poetic, don't you? 6 says. Gohan stares at 6 and slowly begins to realize that 6 wasn't like Cell at all. He wasn't a monster fueled by battle that was doing this for fun. He was, in a sense, an avenger. This was all for revenge. Their talk would be cut short when Piccolo, Krillin, Tien, and Yamcha arrive. 6 looks in their direction, telling them, "I have no qualms with any of you, so if you want to live, I'd advise that you don't interfere. Stay out of my way and I'll stay out of yours. Now, Bald One, give Gohan one of those beans." Piccolo begins to take off his turban and cloak ready to take on the android alongside Gohan, but to his surprise, Gohan tells him to do what he says. Krillin would descend onto the battlefield and give Gohan a Senzu, restoring him back to full strength. "Now, show me that power that you used so long ago," 6 yelled out. Gohan lets out a roar and a golden aura with blue lightning explodes from his body. "Is this what you wanted?" Gohan asks. 6 smirks and tells him, "Now I can crush you at your best." They stare each other down, and within an instant, they both burst forward and clash, causing the entire stage to tremble, and a fierce battle would ensue. They teleport all throughout the battlefield, trading monstrous blows, and as the fight continued, they met on the tournament stage, and both of the warriors threw powerful punches that were blocked by the other. As they entered a stalemate, trying to push the other back, Gohan says, "Even after 6 years of training, I have to say you're a lot stronger than I thought you'd be. And you're about what I expected," 6 says back. 6 would then kick Gohan in the gut, sending him flying back. The Saiyan catches himself and coughs up blood. 6 slowly walks towards him, confident in his ability to win the fight. Gohan wipes the blood from his mouth and says, "If you do kill me, what exactly are you planning on doing next?" 6 stops in his tracks and ponders on the question. He actually never thought about it. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And what does it matter what I do next? The only thing of importance is this battle. 6 rushes in and the battle continues. The two warriors go back and forth, landing explosive blows on one another. Each gut-wrenching punch is met by a skull-crushing kick. Each gruesome strike is matched by a ferocious blow, and this dragged on for what seemed like an eternity. Now bloodied and exhausted, both warriors could do nothing else but stare each other down. "You know, I understand why you hate me so much, and honestly, I don't blame you. I'd hate me too. I took everything from you. Your father, your brothers, and I even tried to kill you. I can only imagine how much pain you must have gone through and how lonely the past 6 years have been for you." Gohan says. 6 grits his teeth as his anger begins to rise. "Don't talk to me as if you know me. I came here to do one thing, so spare me in pity. Now, die." 6 quickly fires off a death beam that pierces through Gohan's stomach. He'd rush in and begin to attack the Saiyan. Gohan tries his best to keep up, but due to his wound, he can't. 6 eventually breaks through Gohan's defenses and begins to beat down on him. And after a long fought battle, Gohan struggles to get on his feet. 6 walks over to the Saiyan and points a finger at his head and begins to charge up a death beam. "Tell me, how does it feel to know that even at your best, there isn't a thing that you can do to stop me? Fear? Anger? Hopelessness? I know those feelings all too well. I wonder what my brothers would think if they could see me now." 6 lets out a laugh. "Guess I'll never know."
Big Bang Attack!
Vegeta fires off his attack and it gets deflected by 6. "Seems as if you've grown. Such a shame that I have to cut you down," Vegeta says as he ascends into his Super Saiyan 2 form. He'd immediately close the distance between himself and 6, and a battle would ensue. Whilst this was going on, Piccolo and the others go to save Gohan. Back over with the fight, 6 doesn't waste his time with Vegeta and he puts the Saiyan on the back foot. And not too long after, Vegeta found himself losing against a fatigued 6. The android knocks the Saiyan into the sky and begins to charge up a Kamehameha looking to end this encounter. In retaliation, Vegeta begins to charge up a final flash, but to 6's surprise, he gets ambushed by both Krillin and Tien, who use a solar flare, blinding him. Tien then yells at Vegeta to hurry up and fire his attack, and with one hit, 6 would knock Tien away. Still blinded, the android's anger would know no bounds. "I gave you all a chance to save yourselves, and yet here you are, throwing it all away. If that's how you want it to be, then so be it. I'll kill you all," 6 yells out. When his eyesight returns, he directs his attention to Vegeta once more, but he'd again get caught off guard by Krillin and Yamcha. The 2 warriors throw their signature attacks at the android. 6 would dodge Yamcha's Spirit Ball with ease, but when it came to Krillin's Destructo Disc, he instead decides to use it to his advantage. By using Frieza's telekinesis ability, he redirected the attack towards Vegeta, powering it up with his own ki in the process. The blade rushes in but gets intercepted by Yamcha's Spirit Ball, causing both attacks to explode and saving Vegeta's life. 6 looks at the 2 Earthlings and, annoyed by them, decides to go for them first, but he'd be stopped by Piccolo, who uses his arms to wrap around the android, holding him back. And with a little bit of struggle, 6 breaks out, and he'd look towards the 3 Z fighters in anger. Tien unleashes a fully powered tri-beam cannon that holds the android in place. He continued to fire it off until he could no longer use it anymore, and once he passes out from exhaustion, 6 charges up a death beam in order to finish him off. And again he gets interrupted by Krillin and Yamcha, who grab onto both of his arms, followed up by Piccolo, who entangles 6 up with the use of his ability. Lightning crackles from Vegeta's final flash, catching all of their attention. The warrior was still charging it up, and the attack felt as if it had more than enough to defeat the weakened android. They all yell at Vegeta to fire it now. 6, in fear of his life, quickly smashed the Earthlings' heads together and sent them flying. And with the use of Piccolo's arms, he pulled the Namekian towards him and he aimed Piccolo towards the blast, intending on using him as a shield. And just when he thought he was safe, he begins to sense a very powerful ki rushing towards him. It was Super Saiyan 2 Gohan. The Saiyan lands a mighty punch on the android that stuns him, causing him to let go of Piccolo. 6's anger would begin to explode as he began to charge up a death beam. "That's enough. I'll destroy this entire planet."
Final Flash!
Vegeta's attack explodes with tremendous force and collides with the android. 6 in retaliation puts up a barrier to defend himself, but even with it, it was obvious that it wouldn't last long as cracks began to form. However, Vegeta was also exhausted and using the final flash for an extended period of time wouldn't fare well for him. Gohan unleashes a Kamehameha that collides into the other side of 6's barrier. With both attacks working in tandem, more cracks begin to form on the android's barrier. 6 makes note of his impending doom and accepts his fate. So, this is how it ends. Forgive me, father, brothers. I'll be seeing you all soon. His barrier would shatter and the 2 attacks collide into his body causing a massive explosion. And with that, this puts an end to this what if. Now I know I left the ending a bit ambiguous, as I didn't know if you guys were going to like this or not, as I focused more on building up a character for someone who doesn't really have one, rather than just throwing him into a what if scenario right off the bat. So if you guys do like it and want to see more, let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll head into the Boo Saga with this character. Otherwise, if not, this can be seen as where 6 dies. But with that being said, thank you to everyone that watched this video. I hope you have a great day. Peace, deuce, deuce.